welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into something really quite fascinating, the connection between Canadian and Australian immigration policies. It runs surprisingly deep.
It really does. Much deeper than you might initially think.
And we know you want the key insights without getting bogged down, so think of this as your shortcut to understanding this, well, pretty significant global alignment.
Yeah, it's a major relationship in the migration world.
We've got some great articles and notes here, and they really highlight how these two countries have almost walked in lockstep on immigration at times.
Uh-huh. The parallels are quite striking when you lay them out.
So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack why. What are the historical reasons, the context behind this synchronization? We think there are some real aha moments waiting.
Definitely. And right off the bat, it's crucial to understand this isn't just a recent thing. This connection, it stems from their shared history.
You mean the British Empire connection?
Exactly. Both Canada and Australia, being part of that empire, inherited this foundational colonial framework. And that really shaped their early thinking on immigration.
Okay, let's dig into that colonial influence. Because early on, it wasn't exactly about diversity and inclusion, was it?
Not at all. Before World War II, the main goal for both, quite explicitly, was creating what they called white settler societies.
Right, so favoring certain people.
Yeah, a very clear preference for migrants from Britain, Northern Europe, building nations in a particular image.
And that meant excluding others. Can you give examples?
Sure. Australia had its infamous White Australia policy. Canada, maybe less formally named, but just as effective, had things like the Chinese head tax. The aim was clear, limit who came from outside Europe.
But within the empire, there was some movement.
Yes, because people in both Canada and Australia were considered British subjects back then. So for those of, European descent, moving between dominions was relatively easier.
So that shared history, similar nation-building goals, that really set the foundation. How did they start moving away from that explicit racial bias then? That feels like a major shift.
It was gradual, really picked up steam after World War II. And what's interesting is an early point where they aligned again.
Oh, what was that?
Both Canada and Australia started bringing in family reunification as a key part of their immigration programs. We're talking the 1940s, 50s, 60s.
So letting people already there bring family members over.
Exactly. It was a way to open the door slightly, a controlled pathway beyond just those traditional European sources.
Okay, so family ties start becoming important. But the really big change, the one everyone talks about, is the point system, right? Canada led the way there.
That's right. 1967, Canada pioneers this comprehensive points-based system. And the key thing, really, was that it was designed to be race neutral.
So not about where you came from, but what you offered.
Pretty much. Evaluating people on things like education, skills, language, not ethnicity. It signals this shared idea about what a good immigrant looks like in a modern economy.
Yeah.
Similar priorities kicking in.
And Australia was watching this happen in Canada.
Oh, absolutely. They observed how Canada's system worked, its successes, its challenges, and then in 1989, Australia launched its own version.
Similar idea, but maybe different emphasis.
Yeah, still points-based, but Australia put a really strong focus on specific skilled occupations, English proficiency, and matching immigrants directly to what their labor market needed at the time.
So it wasn't just coincidence then. They were actively learning from each other.
Definitely. The sources talk about real policy-level exchange. Australian officials literally studied Canada's selection grid.
Wow.
Yeah. There were shared conferences, visits back and forth between immigration departments, and even people being seconded.
You mean staff moving between the two countries' immigration departments?
Exactly. Policy folks getting temporary posts in the other country, often through Commonwealth channels or other forums, learning the ropes firsthand.
That's fascinating. Makes the alignment feel much more deliberate. Now, another area where they seem very similar is multiculturalism.
Yes, that parallel embrace of multiculturalism is another key convergence point. As both nations became more diverse, they adopted policies that, encouraged immigrants to keep their culture but also integrate.
What did that look like practically?
You see similar things emerge. Government services in multiple languages, support for ethnic media, anti-racism laws being passed. And this idea that diversity isn't just, there, but it's actually good for the country.
Yeah.
An asset.
An economic and social advantage.
Right.
So from that early restrictive focus to skills-based selection, then embracing diversity, The parallels are really striking. And this cooperation just got tighter recently with things like the M5.
That's right. The 21st century saw things get more formal, more institutionalized, beyond just sharing ideas to actually aligning systems.
Like what specifically?
Think about shared biometric standards using similar fingerprint or facial recognition tech. Makes tracking people across borders easier, helps prevent fraud.
Okay.
Working together on visa fraud prevention, sometimes even using joint border screening systems, and a lot of information sharing happens through the M5.
That's the Migration 5, Canada, Australia. Who else?
UK, New Zealand, and the US. It's a key forum for this kind of operational cooperation.
And it goes beyond just security, right? What about refugees?
Indeed. Both Canada and Australia have quite similar approaches to resettling refugees, often coordinating with the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency.
And international students, I hear that's another similarity.
Big time. Both countries actively use pathways for international students to gain permanent residence after graduation. They see them as potential skilled workers already somewhat integrated.
You mentioned forums facilitating this, M5 obviously. Any others?
Well, the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the same group as M5 plus the U.S., that broader security cooperation definitely spills over into immigration data sharing.
Right.
And then there's the International Metropolis Project. It started in Canada, but it's global now. It's a major hub for researchers and policymakers to share findings on immigration and integration.
It really paints a picture of these two countries constantly looking at each other, learning, adapting. And you mentioned this people exchange, the actual experts moving between systems. That seems crucial, but maybe less visible.
Absolutely. It's not just about reading each other's laws. The alignment was actively driven by people, policy advisors, immigration officers, diplomats physically moving between the two systems over decades.
Set up that work.
Shared training programs, Commonwealth attachments where someone might spend 6 months or a year in the other country's department, regular meetings at places like OECD migration roundtables. It's like a constant cross-pollination.
So influencing each other quite directly.
Very directly. It even extends to working together on UN migration guidelines or piloting similar programs like community sponsorship for refugees or new digital visa tools.
Okay, so we've got the Colonial Foundation. Let's talk more about those specific ways the exchange happened after WBII. You mentioned Commonwealth administrative circuits. What were those?
Right. So in the, say, 1940s to the 60s, maybe early 70s, there was a lot of movement of civil servants between the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. It was part of the Commonwealth structure.
So an immigration official from Canada might end up working in Canberra for a bit.
Exactly, or vice versa. They attended the same conferences, Commonwealth immigration conferences, Dominion law conferences, even trained at some of the same policy schools in the UK initially. It built this shared administrative culture, a common way of thinking about managing migration.
Even before they were explicitly copying each other's policies.
Precisely. It laid the groundwork. Then later, maybe starting in the 70s, the exchanges became more targeted.
Yes. That's when you see more formal segments and study tours specifically focused on immigration policy. Australian officials coming to Canada to study multiculturalism programs, like the Multiculturalism Directorate. Canadians going to Australia later, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, to see how they were reforming their skilled migration system. Very specific learning objectives.
And then the modern era, M5 and Five Eyes, built on top of that.
Absolutely.
Now you have joint working groups meeting regularly, focusing on really operational stuff. Aligning the algorithms they use for visa screening, for instance.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah. Coordinating how they assess risks at the border, sharing expertise, and sometimes even staff on things like biometrics or asylum claim processing. Joint task forces, people rotating through different ministries.
And the international forums you mentioned, OECD, UNHCR, Metropolis, they act as meeting places.
Crucial meeting places. These aren't just talk fests. They're where officials, academics, NGO folks from both countries really interact intensely, share what works, what doesn't. Best practices get debated and disseminated there.
Academics play a role too, moving back and forth.
A big role. You have researchers specializing in migration who might hold positions at universities in both countries over their careers or consult for both governments.
Like the names you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. People like Stephen Castles, Graham Hugo, Don Deveretz, their comparative work was really influential. And think tanks, public policy schools in both countries, often host fellows from the other, run joint events.
And lastly, shared talent pathways.
Yeah.
Is it actually easy for, say, a Canadian immigration policy wonk to get a job in the Australian system?
Easy might be strong, but there are definitely pathways. Bilateral agreements, Commonwealth preferences sometimes make it possible for citizens to apply for public service jobs in the other country.
Interesting.
And you definitely see younger professionals in the field, migration lawyers, policy analysts, deliberately getting experience in the other country's system to boost their careers. They know the systems are related.
So pulling it all together, this alignment is no accident. It's shared history, similar problems, and this long, continuous, sometimes informal exchange of people and ideas.
That's the core takeaway, that people exchange is huge, even if it's not always in the official reports. Policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's about networks, relationships, shared learning.
It really is almost uncanny how close they stayed on so many issues. Makes you wonder about specific trigger points, crises, or opportunities that push them together at key moments.
And the individuals involved definitely steered things. It's worth looking at some of those key people.
Right. You mentioned Dr. Leslie Ann Hawthorne from Australia first. Tell us about her.
Okay, Dr. Hawthorne, she's based at the University of Melbourne. She's consulted extensively for Canada's IRCC, that's the Immigration Department, especially on skilled migration outcomes.
And for Australia, too.
Yes, advisor to their Department of Home Affairs. Her specialty is really international students, skilled workers, how they integrate into the workforce. She wrote a key OECD report comparing Australia, Canada, and New Zealand's skilled migration policies that got a lot of attention in Canada.
Okay. And from Canada, the late Dr. Don Deveretz.
Yes, from Simon Fraser University. Hugely influential economist of migration. He advised both the Canadian government and Australia's Productivity Commission.
What were his areas?
Things like brain drain, remittances, the economic impact of immigration. He did important comparative studies looking at things like return migration and the costs and benefits to public finances in both countries.
Then there's Dr. Anna Butcher in Sydney.
Right, University of Sydney. She's done work evaluating Canada's express entry system, collaborating with Canadian academics and government folks, and she's consulted for Australian agencies too, particularly on gender issues in migration.
She wrote a book comparing them.
Yeah, gender, migration, and the work of care, Canada and Australia, really highlights those comparative dimensions.
And Dr. Stephen Castle's more academic but still influential.
Definitely. His academic work on migration patterns and theories was world-renowned, and he served on advisory panels for the UN and OECD, so his ideas fed into those international discussions where Canadian and Australian officials were present. Indirect influence, but significant.
And Professor Graham Hugo also sadly passed away.
Another major figure. He worked directly with Canadian demographers on population policy comparisons. And he consulted widely for the Australian Parliament, for Canadian think tanks. A real bridge between research and policy in both places.
So it's clear these individuals, plus the institutions, OECD reviews, the Metropolis Project based in Canada, forums run by places like ANU's Crawford School or IRCC itself, they created this ecosystem for sharing knowledge.
Exactly. A network constantly exchanging ideas, personnel, and best practices. That's what has kept the two countries' policies so closely aligned for so long.
So let's wrap this up. The close ties between Canadian and Australian immigration policy, they're not superficial. They stem from that shared colonial past, facing similar economic and demographic challenges, and crucially, this decades-long continuous conversation involving policy borrowing and actual people moving between the systems.
The impact of those experts and institutional links, often working behind the scenes, has been massive.
It really drives home how connected policy development can be globally, sometimes in ways you don't expect.
That sums it up perfectly. It's a great case study in policy learning and transfer between nations.
Absolutely. It gives you a totally different lens on how countries figure this stuff out. So here's a final thought for you to mull over. Given this incredibly tight, long-standing policy relationship, how might it change with future challenges, climate migration, say, or new geopolitical shifts?
Good question. Will they stick together or diverge?
And are there other pairs of countries out there, maybe seemingly unconnected, whose policies have similarly deep hidden roots intertwined like this? Makes you wonder what other connections are waiting to be uncovered.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.